You know that voice, the one that shows up at 11 p.m. when you're alone, the one that sounds perfectly reasonable, the one that says, just this once won't hurt, you've been doing well, you deserve this, besides, you can always start fresh tomorrow. It uses your vocabulary, your tone, your exact pattern of thinking, and that's what makes it so dangerous. Because that voice isn't you, or rather, it is you. But it's also the thing that's been living inside you, learning your language, studying your weaknesses, and waiting for the precise moment when your defenses are down. It's a parasite that doesn't just feed on you, it speaks past you. And most men never realize they're having a conversation with something that hijacked their own internal monologue years ago. The rationalization feels logical because it's built from your logic. The justification feels reasonable because it mirrors your values. I'll just peek, I'll just edge, I'll just reset the counter one more time and get serious after. And in that moment, it sounds like wisdom. That's the trap. Here's what most men don't understand about addiction. It doesn't attack you from the outside. It doesn't feel like an invading force. It rewrites the operating system. It becomes the translator between what you want and what you do. And the language it speaks, it's your own voice turned against you. Neuroscience research from studies on addiction and the prefrontal cortex shows something disturbing. Addiction doesn't just create cravings. It fundamentally alters the way your brain processes decisions. The prefrontal cortex, that part of your brain responsible for planning, self-control, and rational decision-making, gets progressively weakened. Meanwhile, the limbic system, your survival brain, gets overactivated. It starts treating the thing you're addicted to as if it's necessary for survival. The result? Your rational mind starts serving the addiction instead of you. The part of you that's supposed to protect you from bad decisions becomes the lawyer for those decisions. The voice that should be warning you starts writing permission slips, and it does this so seamlessly that you can't tell where you end and the addiction begins. Because the addiction doesn't live somewhere else. It lives in the same neural pathways you use for everything else. It speaks through the same inner voice you use to plan your day, process your emotions, and talk yourself through problems. Let's zoom in on the mechanism. When you're in the grip of craving, what's actually happening in your brain is a hostile takeover. The limbic system, specifically the nucleus accumbens, your brain's reward center floods with dopamine. This is the chemical that says, this is important, this is survival, pay attention. Normally, this system rewards things like eating, connection, achievement. But addiction hijacks it. It tricks your brain into believing that the substance or behavior is as critical as food or water. And once that signal gets sent, it doesn't ask your prefrontal cortex for permission. It bypasses it entirely. Imaging studies show that in people with addiction, there's reduced connectivity between the prefrontal cortex and the limbic reward regions. The bridge between rational control and survival instinct is damaged. So when the craving hits, your executive function, your ability to say no, to think through consequences, to align your actions with your long-term goals, it's already compromised before the battle even starts. And here's where it gets insidious. That weakened prefrontal cortex doesn't go silent. It doesn't stop talking. Instead, it starts generating rationalizations. It starts constructing narratives that make the craving seem logical, necessary even. Because your brain isn't trying to destroy you. It's trying to resolve the tension between what the limbic system is screaming for and what you consciously believe about yourself. So it builds a bridge, a story, a justification. You've had a tough week. This is the last time. You're not as bad as other people. You can handle it now, you're stronger. These aren't lies. They're adaptive narratives. Your brain is trying to make sense of a contradiction. The part of you that wants to quit versus the part that's convinced it needs this to survive. And the resolution? A story that makes indulging feel like the reasonable choice. Addiction researchers call this rationalization, a cognitive distortion where you explain away destructive behavior with plausible sounding reasons. And the research on relapse prevention shows that these rationalizations are a primary pathway to relapse. They're not random, they're predictable. They follow patterns, and they always sound like you. Because they are you, just not the part you think. Here's the paradox that breaks most men. The voice is authentic. It's not some demon whispering in your ear. It's your own neural circuitry, reorganized by addiction. Every word it says is generated by the same brain that forms your thoughts, your beliefs, your sense of self. Which means you can't just dismiss it. You can't ignore the addiction like it's a separate entity. Because it's woven into the fabric of how you think. This is why willpower alone fails. This is why just say no is useless. Because the thing you're fighting isn't outside you. It's the part of you that learned to survive by convincing you that surrender is wisdom. And the scariest part, it gets smarter over time. Each time you relapse, the addiction learns. It learns what arguments work on you, what time of day you're weakest, what emotions make you vulnerable. And it files that information away, ready to deploy it the next time you feel strong. Because the addiction doesn't want you to fail completely, it wants you to believe you're in control. It wants you to think you're making a choice. That's how it keeps you in the cycle. If you felt completely powerless, you'd seek help. If you felt completely addicted, you'd change your life. But if you feel like you're managing it, like you're mostly in control, like you just need to try harder next time, then you stay exactly where the addiction wants you. Trapped in a loop that feels like freedom. Studies on addiction and the brain show that this hijacking of decision-making persists long after you stop using. The neural pathways don't just reset. The weakened connection between your prefrontal cortex and your reward system can take months, even years, to rebuild. Which means even when you're clean, the voice is still there, still speaking in your tone, still sounding reasonable, still waiting. So how do you fight something that uses your own thoughts against you? You learn to hear the difference. There's a space narrow, almost invisible between authentic desire and hijacked craving. Between what you genuinely want for your life and what the addiction has convinced you that you need. And the only way to find that space is to slow down the moment before the rationalization begins. Because here's what most men miss. The choice doesn't happen when you're staring at the screen. It doesn't happen when the urge is already at full intensity. It happens in the seconds before. In the apparently irrelevant decisions that set up the relapse. Staying up late when you know you should sleep. Opening your phone when you're bored. Telling yourself you'll just browse, even though you know where that leads. These aren't neutral choices. They're the covert antecedents the setup moves the addiction makes before it even has to deploy the big rationalization. And in those moments, there's a quality to the voice, a texture. If you learn to listen closely, you can feel it. The authentic you, the one aligned with your long-term vision, feels like stillness, like clarity, like a quiet knowing that doesn't need to convince you of anything. The hijacked voice, it's urgent, it's persuasive, it builds complex arguments. It anticipates your objections and counters them before you even raise them. It sounds smart, articulate, logical, but it's always moving toward one outcome, and it never stops talking. Research on inner speech shows that our internal monologue is tied to executive function and self-regulation. It's the voice we use to plan, to reflect, to make sense of the world. But in addiction, that voice gets co-opted. It starts working for the survival brain instead of the executive brain. It becomes the translator that makes destruction sound like wisdom. The way back is awareness, not fighting the voice, not trying to silence it, but recognizing it for what it is, observing it, creating enough distance to say, I see you, I know what you're doing, and I'm not listening this time. It won't stop talking, not immediately, but each time you recognize it and choose differently, you weaken its authority. Each time you see the rationalization forming and refuse to follow it, you rebuild the bridge between your prefrontal cortex and your deeper values. You start reclaiming the machinery of your own mind. This is the invisible war happening in the background of every man's life who's struggling with this. Not between you and some external enemy, between the part of you that's been colonized and the part that still remembers what sovereignty feels like. And sovereignty isn't about never feeling the urge. It's about no longer believing the story the urge tells you. Because the addiction doesn't need you to be weak. It just needs you to be convinced. Convinced just this once is different. Convinced that you've earned it. Convinced that you can handle it this time. And as long as it can convince you, it doesn't matter how strong you are. It doesn't matter how disciplined you've been. It doesn't matter how many days you've stacked. The voice will always find a way in. Unless you learn to distinguish your thoughts from the parasite's thoughts. Unless you learn to feel the difference between authentic inner guidance and adaptive rationalization designed to keep you in the cycle. That distinction, that sliver of awareness between this sounds like me and this iced me, is where freedom lies. Not in willpower, not in white-knuckling through cravings, but in the quiet recognition that says, I hear you. I know exactly what you're doing, and I'm not you. And the moment you can say that and mean it, the parasite loses its most powerful weapon, your own voice. Because it turns out, the thing that's been speaking as you can only survive as long as you believe it. The second you see it clearly, the second you recognize it for what it is, it stops being invisible. It stops being you. And once it stops being you, it stops having power. The work isn't to destroy the voice. It's to reclaim the authority over your own mind. To rebuild the neural pathways that got hijacked. To practice distinguishing the signal from the noise until your authentic voice, the one aligned with who you're actually becoming, gets louder than that's been keeping you trapped. And that starts now. Not tomorrow, not after one more reset. Now, in this moment, by simply noticing when the voice starts building its case, by feeling the texture of rationalization forming, by recognizing the setup before the setup becomes inevitable. Awareness is the crack in the prison, and every time you choose it, every time you see clearly instead of believing blindly, the walls get a little thinner. Until one day you realize the voice is still there, but you're not listening it anymore, because you finally learned to tell the difference between the parasite and you.